A weary single dad shields a stranger from the storm with nothing but a battered umbrella. He thinks it's just a simple act of kindness. But the next morning, his world tilts because that stranger is a billionaire, a woman with more secrets than money can hide. What begins as a chance meeting turns into an impossible bond, until a glittering gala explodes with a child's whisper, "Mommy says you're my daddy." Now, love collides with lies, power battles, truth, and a small-town veteran finds himself caught between protecting his family and standing beside the woman who may finally heal his heart. But when storms rage and the past refuses to stay buried, can an umbrella strong enough to cover two strangers also shield an entire community? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The summer heat had been stifling all afternoon in Savannah, the kind that made the air feel thick enough to swim through. Caleb Brooks wiped his brow as he and his daughter Maya hurried down Broughton Street, trying to beat the darkening clouds overhead. The first fat droplets of rain began to fall, splattering against the weathered concrete. "Looks like we're cutting it close for choir practice," Caleb said, reaching into his worn canvas messenger bag for the umbrella he always kept handy. It had seen better days, with one bent rib and faded blue fabric, but it was reliable, just like him. Maya nodded, her braids bouncing as she picked up her pace. "Pastor Ruth says we're working on a new spiritual for Sunday." At 16, she had her mother's voice and an eagerness that made Caleb's heart ache with pride and memory. The skies opened up without warning, turning the afternoon into a gray curtain of water. Caleb quickly deployed the umbrella, pulling Maya close as other pedestrians scattered for cover. The rain drummed steadily against the fabric above them. That's when he saw her, a woman in a crisp business suit, pressing herself against a storefront's shallow alcove. Despite her elegant appearance, she seemed almost small as she hugged her thin raincoat around herself, water streaming down her face. "Ma'am?" Caleb called out, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he used when approaching spooked horses on his grandfather's farm as a boy. "Would you like to share our umbrella?" The woman looked up, startled. Her silver-streaked hair was plastered to her temples, but there was something dignified in how she held herself, even while dripping. She hesitated, studying them with intelligent eyes. "That's very kind," she said finally, her voice warm and clear despite the rain. "But I wouldn't want to impose." Maya spoke up. "It's no trouble. Dad always says an umbrella's meant for sharing." A smile touched the woman's lips, transforming her whole face. "In that case, I'd be grateful." She stepped forward, and Caleb shifted to make space between himself and Maya. "I'm Caleb Brooks," he said, offering his free hand, "and this is my daughter Maya." "Vivian," she replied simply, her handshake firm but brief. Water trickled down her neck, and without thinking, Caleb pulled out the clean handkerchief he always carried, another habit from his military days. "Here," he said, holding it out. "If you'd like to dry off a bit." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something softer. "Thank you." She dabbed at her face, careful not to smudge her makeup. "I don't suppose you're also carrying a spare pair of shoes?" She gestured ruefully at her elegant heels, now thoroughly soaked. Maya giggled, and Caleb found himself chuckling too. "Fresh out of those, I'm afraid, but the umbrella's yours to share, as long as you need it." They fell into step together, an unlikely trio navigating the rain-slicked sidewalk. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, like a stream finding its natural course. "What brings you out in this weather?" Vivian asked, genuine interest in her tone. "Choir practice at St. Phoebe's," Maya answered proudly. "I'm singing solo this Sunday." She inherited her mother's voice. Caleb added softly, the words carrying both joy and an old ache. Something in Vivian's expression shifted, a flash of understanding that needed no words. "Music has a way of connecting us to those we love," she said quietly. Even across time, they passed shops with rain-streaked windows, their warm lights glowing like beacons in the gray afternoon. The air smelled of wet pavement and the sweet, heavy perfume of magnolia trees. "You sound like you speak from experience," Caleb observed, noting how Vivian's eyes had grown distant. "My mother loved Chopin," she said after a moment. "She played piano every evening, right up until—" She left the sentence unfinished, but Caleb understood. Loss had its own language, spoken in these careful silences. Maya, with the gentle intuition that sometimes surprised him, began humming softly. "His eye is on the sparrow," her mother's favorite hymn. The sound rose clear and pure above the rainfall. Vivian closed her eyes briefly, listening. "Beautiful," she murmured when Maya finished. "Thank you." They reached a crosswalk, the signal glowing red against the rain. Vivian glanced at her watch, then up at them with what seemed like reluctance. "This is where I turn," she said. "I can't thank you enough for the umbrella and the company." "You're welcome," Caleb replied, meaning it deeply. "Stay dry out there." With a final smile that seemed to hold something unspoken, Vivian stepped away from their shelter and into the rain. Her figure grew less distinct as she moved through the gray curtain of water until she disappeared around a corner. Caleb stood there, Maya warm against his side, watching the space where Vivian had vanished. The rain continued its steady rhythm on their umbrella, but something felt different. As if the simple act of sharing shelter had shifted something in the afternoon's fabric. Maya tugged gently at his sleeve. "Dad? We'll be late." "Right," he said, coming back to himself. But even as they resumed their walk to St. Phoebe's, he couldn't shake the feeling of how natural it had felt, those few blocks of conversation with a stranger who somehow hadn't felt strange at all. The rain poured down around them, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the savannah sky. The morning sun filtered through the open garage door, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Caleb knelt beside a veteran's old Chevy van. His tools lay scattered around him like faithful companions, each one worn smooth from years of honest work. The air hummed with the familiar sense of motor oil and metal. "Try it now, Jim," Caleb called out to the van's owner, a former Marine who'd been coming to him for repairs since Caleb first set up his mobile service. The engine turned over with a healthy rumble, no longer making the concerning knock that had brought Jim in first thing this morning. The older veteran's face broke into a relieved smile from behind the wheel. "You've got the magic touch, Brooks," Jim said, patting the steering wheel affectionately. "What do I owe you?" Caleb wiped his hands on a shop rag, leaving dark smudges on the already stained cloth. "Parts and an hour's labor. But you know my veteran's discount." Maya sat at her usual spot, a small desk tucked in the corner of the garage where she did her homework or helped with the books between classes. She looked up from her physics textbook, shaking her head with a fond smile. Her father's veteran's discount often meant charging barely more than the cost of parts. The screech of expensive tires on pavement drew their attention. A sleek black town car, polished to mirror brightness, pulled up to the garage entrance. It looked startlingly out of place among the working-class vehicles that usually visited Caleb's shop. The driver's door opened, and a man in a crisp uniform stepped out, his posture military straight. He surveyed the garage before his eyes settled on Caleb. "Mr. Brooks?" the driver asked, his tone professional but warm. Caleb straightened, unconsciously squaring his shoulders. "That's me." The driver reached into his jacket and produced a cream-colored envelope. "From Ms. Hart," he said simply, extending it toward Caleb. Maya had abandoned her textbook, moving closer with undisguised curiosity. Jim, still in his van, watched the scene unfold with raised eyebrows. Caleb accepted the envelope, noting the weight of the paper and the elegant script that spelled out his name. He opened it carefully, mindful of his oil-stained fingers. Inside was a check that made his eyes widen and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. The check was made out to Magnolia Commons Veteran Center for an amount that made him blink several times to ensure he wasn't seeing things. "Maya," he said quietly, "could you look something up for me?" His daughter was already tapping away at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "Way ahead of you, Dad. Oh my God." She looked up, her eyes huge. "Vivian Hart. She's the founder of Hart Medical Technologies. She's worth—" Maya's voice dropped to a whisper, "billions." The note in Caleb's hand suddenly felt heavier. He read the elegant handwriting. "Dear Mr. Brooks, your kindness yesterday meant more than you know. Please accept this donation for the Veterans Center as a thank you. The world needs more people willing to share their umbrella with strangers. Would you join me for coffee?" A business card was paper-clipped to the note, with a personal phone number written on the back. Jim had climbed out of his van and wandered over. "Hart? The Vivian Hart? What's she doing sending you notes, Brooks?" Maya bounced on her toes, excitement making her words tumble out. "Dad offered her his umbrella yesterday, in the rain. We had no idea who she was. She just said her name was Vivian. But Dad, she's like, seriously famous. She revolutionized medical technology after caring for her sick mother. She's known for being super private. There's hardly any photos of her online." Caleb sank onto a nearby stool, still holding the note. The elegant woman from yesterday, who had accepted his handkerchief and shared their umbrella with such grace, was one of the wealthiest people in America. Who had smiled at Maya's singing and spoken so tenderly about her own mother's piano playing. "Well, I'll be damned," Jim whispered, peering at the check. "That's a lot of zeros, brother." Maya pulled up article after article on her phone. "She's brilliant, Dad. She developed systems that help doctors treat patients in remote areas. And look, she's known for her philanthropy, but she never does interviews. The press calls her the invisible billionaire because she's so private." Caleb carefully returned the check and note to the envelope, his mind swimming. The woman he'd met hadn't seemed like a billionaire. There had been something almost vulnerable about her, standing there in the rain. Something genuine in the way she'd listened to Maya, in how she'd shared that memory of her mother. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Maya asked, watching his face. "About the coffee?" He looked down at the business card, at that handwritten phone number. The memory of yesterday's easy conversation beneath the umbrella rose in his mind. How natural it had felt. How real. But now, knowing who she was, "I don't know, baby girl," he said honestly. This is a whole different world. But she's still the same person we met," Maya pointed out softly. "The one who talked about Chopin and thanked you like you'd given her something precious, not just an old umbrella." Jim clapped Caleb on the shoulder. "Your daughter's got a point. Money doesn't change who someone is, it just makes it harder to see them clearly sometimes." Caleb turned the card over in his hands, remembering the way Vivian had looked when Maya sang, that unguarded moment of pure appreciation, the way she'd spoken about her mother with such raw honesty. The business card caught the morning light, and those simple words seemed to glow. "Thank you for the umbrella. Coffee?" He sat there, feeling the weight of the choice before him, while the familiar sounds of his garage, the tick of cooling engines, the distant traffic, Maya's gentle humming, filled the thoughtful silence. The morning sun warmed the weathered brick of Magnolia Commons as Caleb paced near the entrance. He'd chosen a clean work shirt, no grease stains, but kept his regular jeans and boots. This was his world. He wouldn't pretend to be something he wasn't. Maya sat on the front steps, tinkering with circuit boards spread across her lap. "Dad, you're going to wear a path in the concrete." "Just making sure everything's ready," he mumbled, straightening a already straight chair for the third time. Walt Pop Delaney's pickup rattled into the parking lot right on schedule. The Vietnam veteran climbed out slowly, his movements deliberate but dignified. "Morning, Brooks family," he called out, his voice gruff but warm. "Heard we're having a special visitor." Before Caleb could respond, a modest silver sedan pulled into the lot. No town car this time, no driver. Vivian Hart stepped out wearing dark jeans, a simple blouse, and comfortable flats. Her silver hair was pulled back in a casual twist, and she carried a canvas tote bag instead of a designer purse. "Good morning," she said, approaching with a smile that reached her eyes. "I hope I'm not late." "Right on time," Caleb replied, extending his hand. "Welcome to Magnolia Commons." Maya bounced up, careful not to disturb her electronics. "Ms. Hart, would you like to see my robotics project? I'm working on a solar-powered irrigation system for the community garden." "I'd love to," Vivian said, her face lighting up with genuine interest. "And please, call me Vivian." Walt cleared his throat meaningfully, and Caleb started. "Oh, Vivian, this is Walt Delaney. Everyone calls him Pop. He's been the heart of this place since before I got back from my own service." "Vietnam, '68, Walt said, offering a weathered hand. "This place saved my life when I came home. Still does, most days." They moved inside, where morning light streamed through tall windows. Veterans of different ages gathered at scattered tables, some playing chess, others helping with maintenance projects. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air from the kitchen, where volunteers prepared lunch for anyone who needed it. Vivian listened intently as Maya explained her robotics project, asking thoughtful questions that showed she understood the technical details. Her eyes sparkled when Maya demonstrated a working prototype, the small pump whirring to life under the desk lamp's artificial sun. "This is brilliant," Vivian said. "Have you considered adding a moisture sensor to optimize water usage?" Maya's face lit up. "I wanted to, but the ones I found online were too expensive. I might have some spare parts that would work," Vivian offered. "From my company's research lab. They're just gathering dust." Walt had settled into his usual chair, watching the exchange with keen eyes. "Mrs. Hart," he called out, "you know anything about dominoes?" "I'm afraid I'm terribly out of practice," she answered, moving to his table. "But I'd love to learn from an expert." As Walt explained his strategies, the lunch prep team called out from the kitchen. Without hesitation, Vivian rolled up her sleeves. "May I help?" Caleb watched in amazement as this billionaire philanthropist tied on an apron and joined the assembly line, ladling out homemade vegetable soup alongside regular volunteers. She chatted easily with everyone, asking about their families, their stories, their needs, and really listening to the answers. When lunch was served, she sat at a table with Walt, who regaled her with stories from the Commons' early days. She laughed at all the right moments, asked the right questions, and shared her own memories of caring for her mother during her long illness. "That's why I started the foundation," she explained, breaking off a piece of bread. "Healthcare shouldn't be a luxury. Neither should dignity." Caleb found himself drawn into the conversation, sharing his own experiences of coming home from service, of raising Maya alone after his wife passed. Vivian's eyes held such understanding that the words flowed naturally. The afternoon passed quickly. When Vivian finally gathered her things to leave, she paused by the entrance. "Thank you for suggesting we meet here," she told Caleb. "Hotels are lonely places. This feels real. Come back any time," he said softly. "We serve lunch every day." Her smile was warm. "I just might take you up on that." After she left, the Commons hummed with excited conversation. Walt gave Caleb a knowing look. "She's something else, isn't she?" "Nothing like what you'd expect." Later that evening, Caleb and Maya sat at their small kitchen table, eating leftover soup from the Commons. Rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere inside. "She smiled at you more than once," Maya said, trying to hide her grin behind her soup spoon. Caleb chuckled, but his eyes drifted to the rain-streaked window. The patterns of water against glass reminded him of that first meeting, of an umbrella shared between strangers who might not be strangers much longer. Sunlight streamed through the Commons' tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. Vivian stood before a large planning poster that had arrived that morning, her finger tracing along colorful zones marked for the Hart Foundation's new wellness complex. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, then to horror. "No, this can't be right," she whispered, leaning closer to study the map's details. Caleb approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He'd gotten used to their morning routine over the past week. She'd stop by, they'd share coffee, and she'd listen to veteran stories. But today, something was different. The usual warmth in her eyes had been replaced by distress. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting the mugs down on a nearby table. Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she pointed to a section marked Parcel C in bold red letters. "The Commons. It's right here. In the demolition zone." Caleb stepped closer, his coffee forgotten. The map showed their beloved building replaced by a sleek medical center, complete with architectural renderings of glass and steel. His throat tightened. "This is a Heart Foundation project?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Yes, but Vivian pressed her hands against the table's edge. "I didn't know." Graham Whitaker, our board chair, presented this as urban renewal. He said we were clearing abandoned properties. The morning quiet felt heavy now. Through the windows, they could see Walt helping a younger veteran with his physical therapy exercises in the garden. Maya sat with them, taking notes for her science project on rehabilitation techniques. "Abandoned?" Caleb's word carried the weight of decades. "We serve 60 meals a day here. Run support groups. Help veterans navigate their benefits. Maya teaches computer skills to kids while their parents get counseling." He gestured to the walls around them. "These bricks hold more life than any glass tower ever could." Vivian turned to face him, her usual composure cracking. "Caleb, I swear I didn't know. The board handles most development projects. I focus on medical research and grant programs." She ran a hand through her silver hair. "But this is wrong." Through the office window, they could see more veterans arriving for the morning programs. Some walked with canes, others helped each other up the ramp that Walt and Caleb had built last summer. Each face told a story of service, struggle, and finding community within these walls. "I know you didn't mean for this," Caleb said finally, his voice softening, "but intention doesn't change the result. These people, my people, they can't lose another home." Vivian watched a young veteran laugh at something Walt said, the sound carrying through the open window. Her shoulders straightened with resolve. "I'll stop it," she declared. "I'm still CEO. The board needs my approval for major projects." She pulled out her phone, fingers moving quickly. "I'm calling an emergency review. Everything stops until we reassess." Caleb wanted to believe her. The past week had shown him a woman of surprising depth and genuine compassion. But he'd also learned in the Army that good intentions often crumbled against institutional momentum. "Can you really override your board?" he asked quietly. "Watch me." Her voice carried steel now. "Graham sold this as progress, but there's nothing progressive about destroying what works." She gestured to the bustling room around them. "This is real healing, real community. I won't let anyone tear it down." They stood in silence for a moment, the morning sun warming the wooden floors that had supported thousands of veterans' steps toward healing. Through the walls came the muffled sound of the art therapy group setting up, brushes clinking against water jars. "Thank you," Caleb said finally, "for being willing to fight for us." Vivian's eyes met his, firm with determination. "I'm not just willing. I'm going to win." She pulled out a pen and wrote her private number on the back of her business card. "If anyone shows up with paperwork or tries to start preliminary work, call me immediately. Day or night." The morning proceeded with its usual rhythm, but undercurrents of tension remained. Vivian stayed longer than usual, taking photos of the activities, documenting the services provided. She interviewed veterans about what the Commons meant to them, recording their stories with careful attention. As the day wound down, Caleb found himself making his final rounds. The building creaked softly as it cooled in the evening air, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. Most nights he appreciated the quiet moment to reflect on the day's small victories. A veteran finding a job, a family getting housing assistance, Maya teaching an elder how to video chat with grandchildren. Tonight, though, the silence felt heavier. He checked each room methodically. Art supplies stored away, coffee maker unplugged, security system armed. In the main hall, the planning map still hung on the wall, its clean lines and modern designs threatening to erase years of history. At the front door, Caleb paused with his hand on the light switch. The street lamp outside cast long shadows through the windows, highlighting the scratches and scuffs on the floor, each mark a testament to the lives touched within these walls. "Hold on, old girl," he whispered to the building that had sheltered so many. "We'll fight for you." He locked the door, tested the handle twice as always, and stood for a moment on the worn front steps. Above him, the Common's brick facade glowed warm in the evening light, as solid and steadfast as the day it first opened its doors to broken soldiers seeking healing. The Hart Foundation's annual charity gala transformed the Savannah Convention Center's ballroom into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow sparkles across polished marble floors, and the city's wealthiest residents floated between white-clothed tables in designer evening wear. Caleb Brooks adjusted his army dress blues for the 10th time, standing at the entrance. The ribbons and medals on his chest felt heavy, like armor against the stares of Savannah's elite. Maya squeezed his arm, radiant in a borrowed blue dress from the church clothing drive. "You look handsome, Dad," she whispered. "Stop fidgeting." "I haven't worn this uniform since," he trailed off, thinking of his wife's funeral. "Mom would be proud," Maya said softly. "And look, someone else thinks you clean up nice too." Across the room, Vivian Hart stood out in a simple black evening gown. When she spotted them, her whole face lit up. She excused herself from a cluster of board members and made her way over, turning heads as she crossed the marble floor. "You came," she said, reaching for Caleb's hand. Her silver hair was elegantly swept up, but her smile held the same warmth he'd first seen in the rain. "And Maya, you look beautiful." Maya grinned. "Thanks for inviting us." Though Dad almost chickened out 3 times. "Did not," Caleb protested, but he was smiling too. "Just hadn't planned on wearing this again." "Well, I'm glad you did." Vivian's eyes traced the ribbons on his chest with respect. "Would you like to meet some people?" "No pressure. We can just enjoy the music if you prefer." Before Caleb could answer, a commotion near the coat check caught their attention. Marisol Alvarez, wearing her catering uniform, was trying to catch her son Nico, who had slipped away from the staff area. The 8-year-old darted between guests in his small black vest, eyes wide with wonder at the fancy party. "I should help," Vivian said. But she was too late. Nico had already reached the center of the room where Graham Whitaker held court, champagne in hand, as he charmed potential donors. The boy tugged at Graham's perfectly tailored sleeve. The room seemed to still as Graham looked down, annoyed at first, then confused. "Yes?" Nico's clear voice carried in the sudden quiet, "Mommy says you're my daddy." The champagne glass slipped from Graham's fingers, shattering on the marble floor. His face drained of color as camera flashes erupted from the society photographers along the walls. Marisol froze halfway across the room, her hands pressed to her mouth. Guests gasped and whispered. Phones appeared, recording the moment. Graham's wife stumbled backward, gripping a chair for support. I don't," Graham stammered, looking wildly around the room. His eyes locked on Marisol, and his shock hardened to fury. "Security! Remove this woman and her child immediately." 2 security guards started forward, but Vivian's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop right there." She strode toward the center of the room, every inch the CEO. "Nobody is removing anyone." She turned to the guards. "Please escort Mr. Whitaker to my office instead, now." Graham's face flushed dark red. "You can't." "I can and I will." Vivian's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "My office, now." As the guards led a protesting Graham away, Vivian knelt beside Nico. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The boy nodded, lower lip trembling. "Did I do something bad?" "No, honey, you told the truth." "That's never bad." She stood and walked to where Marisol stood frozen. "Take him home, Marisol. Paid leave starts immediately. My lawyers will call you tomorrow." Caleb watched as Marisol gathered Nico and hurried out, the boy's small voice echoing, "But Mama, why is everyone so mad?" The ballroom erupted in urgent whispers. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. Graham's wife was escorted out a side door by sympathetic friends. Through it all, reporters circled like sharks, firing questions at anyone who would talk. Vivian made her way back to Caleb and Maya, her composure intact but her hands trembling slightly. She reached for Caleb's steady grip. "This storm's just starting," Caleb muttered, holding her hand tight as cameras flashed around them. The Savannah Morning News landed on Caleb's front porch with a dull thud. He didn't need to bend down to see the headline splashed across the front page: Hart Foundation Gala Rocked by Scandal. Below it, 3 photos dominated the page: Graham Whitaker's pale, shocked face, Marisol hurrying out with Nico, and Caleb's stomach turned a shot of him holding Vivian's hand in the aftermath. He picked up the paper, his coffee forgotten on the porch railing. The article wasted no time connecting dots that weren't there. Sources say the timing of the paternity revelation may be linked to recent controversy over the Magnolia Commons redevelopment project, where local veteran Caleb Brooks has been seen in the company of Hart Foundation CEO Vivian Hart. "Don't read that garbage," Maya called from the doorway. She was already dressed for school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Social media's even worse. Everyone's got a theory." Caleb folded the paper under his arm. "You okay? People at school might talk. Let them." Maya lifted her chin. "We didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Ms. Hart." His phone buzzed Vivian's number. He'd been expecting her call, but his thumb still hesitated over the screen. "Answer it," Maya urged. "She's probably worried sick." She kissed his cheek and headed for the bus stop, calling over her shoulder, "Tell her I said hi." Caleb waited until Maya was out of earshot before answering, "Morning, Caleb." Vivian's voice was strained. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea about Graham and Marisol. None of us did. I believe you." And he did. The shock on her face last night had been real. The press is. They're trying to connect everything. The Commons. You and me. Graham's. She took a shaky breath. "I've called an emergency board meeting. Graham's been suspended pending investigation." Caleb settled into the porch swing, studying the morning glory vines that climbed the railing. His wife had planted them years ago. What happens now? Legally? Our attorneys are working with Marisol's team. Ethically? I'm launching a full review of the Foundation's practices. Graham had too much unchecked power. She paused. "But Caleb, I need you to know what's happening between us. It's not connected to any of this. What I feel..." A car horn blared in the background on her end. "Are you driving?" he asked. "No, Richard is. I'm headed to the board meeting." Another horn, closer. "The press found out where I live. They've been camped outside since dawn." Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. The thought of reporters harassing her made his jaw clench. "You need anything?" Her laugh was soft, tired. "Just you. But I understand if you want to step back until this blows over." The media attention. "Vivian." He cut her off gently. "I've faced worse than nosy reporters. The Commons project is still under review," she continued. "I won't let them rush any decisions while this scandal's unfolding. But Graham has allies on the board. They're already pushing back, saying we need to stay the course despite his indiscretions." Caleb heard what she wasn't saying. The fight for the Commons just got harder. Graham's supporters would be looking for revenge. "One day at a time," he said. "That's what we taught the younger vets at Group. Just handle what's in front of you today. And what's in front of me is a room full of angry board members." She sighed. "I should go. We're almost there." "Hey!" Caleb watched a hummingbird dart between the morning glories. "Remember what you told me at the Commons that first day? About doing what's right, even when it's hard?" "I remember. Same goes for you." Whatever those board members throw at you today, you're doing the right thing." The smile was back in her voice. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything. Starting with that umbrella." After they hung up, Caleb sat a while longer on the porch. The morning was heating up, promising another sticky Savannah day. He thought about Marisol and Nico, hoping they were somewhere peaceful. About Graham's wife, blindsided in front of hundreds. About Vivian walking into that boardroom with her head high. Finally, he went inside to change. The Commons would be opening soon, and there were veterans counting on their morning coffee and conversation. Headlines or no headlines, some things didn't change. He found Maya in the living room, bent over something in her lap. His old umbrella, the one he'd shared with Vivian, was spread across her knees. She had his sewing kit open beside her, carefully stitching a tear in the black fabric. "Thought you left for school," he said. "Bus was early. I'll catch the next one." Her fingers moved steadily, pulling the thread tight. "Found this in the closet. The ribs are solid, but it needed some love." Caleb watched his daughter work, her face set in concentration, just like her mother's used to be. The morning light caught the silver thread she was using, making it shine against the dark fabric. "It's still good, Dad," Maya said without looking up. "Just needs patching." The fellowship hall of St. Phoebe's Baptist Church hummed with activity. Folding tables formed a patchwork across the room, laden with steaming crockpots and covered dishes. The scent of Pastor Ruth's famous cornbread mingled with Miss Dorothy's collard greens and at least 3 different versions of mac and cheese. But it wasn't just the food drawing people in. Around a large table near the windows, a group of elderly women worked with practiced hands, stitching names onto squares of fabric. Their fingers moved steadily, each stitch a prayer, each name a story. "Make sure Walter's middle initial is right, Mrs. Jenkins called out, adjusting her glasses. "He's particular about that P for Percy." Pastor Ruth moved between the groups, her silver hair catching the late afternoon light. She paused to squeeze shoulders and whisper encouragement, her presence as warm as the summer air drifting through the open windows. Maya sat cross-legged in a corner, her laptop balanced on her knees. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she put the finishing touches on the online petition. "Save Magnolia Commons, our veterans' home, away from home," the headline read. She'd spent hours getting the wording just right, adding photos of veterans at their weekly coffee meetups, of Pop teaching kids how to fold flags, of her dad fixing someone's car in the parking lot. The church door creaked open, and conversations stuttered to a halt. Vivian Hart stood in the doorway, wearing simple slacks and a blue blouse. No designer labels, no security detail, just her, holding a covered dish. Pastor Ruth broke the silence, striding forward with open arms. "Welcome, child. What did you bring us?" "My mother's sweet potato pie," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the stares. "Though I warn you, I'm not the cook she was." "Brave woman, bringing pie to a Baptist potluck," Pastor Ruth laughed, taking the dish. "Come on in. Maya's got something to show you." Maya jumped up, nearly dropping her laptop. "Miss Hart, Vivian, I just finished the petition. Would you want to be the first signature?" The room held its breath. Everyone knew what it meant, the CEO of the Hart Foundation publicly supporting a campaign against her own project. Vivian crossed to Maya's corner and sat beside her on the worn carpet, smoothing her slacks with elegant hands. "Show me." Maya turned the screen, watching anxiously as Vivian read. The older woman's eyes lingered on each photo, each carefully chosen word. When she reached the bottom, she smiled. "Hand me that laptop, honey." With deliberate keystrokes, Vivian Hart entered her name and email. She added a comment. "The Commons saved my friend's life. Some things matter more than progress." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Jenkins dropped her needle. Someone whispered, "Well, I'll be." "Send me the link," Vivian said to Maya. "I know some people who should see this." The tension broke. Women returned to their stitching, though now their chatter included Vivian. She moved between tables, learning names, listening to stories about the veterans whose names were being sewn into the quilt. Caleb arrived, as the sun was setting, still in his work clothes. He'd been fixing cars all day, but his face brightened when he saw Vivian among the quilters. String lights twinkled to life in the church garden, a sign that Pastor Ruth was nudging them toward evening prayers. But first, people began drifting to the food tables, paper plates in hand. "Want to get some air?" Caleb asked Vivian softly. They slipped outside. The garden was small but lovely, with climbing roses and a few wooden benches. The string lights cast a gentle glow, competing with the first stars appearing above. "That was quite a statement you made in there," Caleb said, settling onto a bench. Vivian sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. It was the truth. The commons matters. "What you've built there, what all of you have built, it's sacred ground. You know the board won't like it. The board doesn't like a lot of things lately." She turned to face him, including us. The word hung between them. Us. Such a small word for such a big feeling. "Are we an us?" Caleb asked quietly. "I think we've been an us since you lifted that umbrella over my head." Vivian's hand found his in the growing darkness. "I know the timing is terrible. The scandal with Graham, the fight for the commons, the media circus. But what I feel when I'm with you, it's real, Caleb. It's the most real thing in my life right now." Caleb's thumb traced circles on her palm. "When Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. Figured I'd focus on Maya, on the commons. Didn't expect." He took a breath. "Didn't expect to feel this way again." Inside, they could hear Maya's voice leading everyone in Amazing Grace. The sound drifted out to the garden, carrying on the evening breeze. "I should get back," Vivian said reluctantly. "Early meeting tomorrow." They stood, but before they could head inside, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the door. "Here, Miss Hart, made you your own square." She pressed a small piece of fabric into Vivian's hands. "You're part of this now, whether those fancy board members like it or not." The square was simple, just Vivian's first name embroidered in blue thread, surrounded by tiny stars. But the stitches were made with care, with acceptance, with hope. Vivian's fingers trembled as she traced the letters. "Thank you," she whispered. She said her goodbyes quickly after that, hugging Maya and promising Pastor Ruth she'd bring another pie soon. As her driver pulled up to the curb, she held the quilt square close to her chest, like it was worth more than all her diamonds and stock portfolios combined. Through the car window, Caleb watched her press the fabric over her heart one more time before the car merged into the evening traffic and disappeared. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Vivian's historic townhouse, casting long shadows across the marble countertops. Marisol stood at the kitchen sink, mechanically washing dishes from Vivian's breakfast, her shoulders tense. "Marisol," Vivian said gently, setting her coffee cup down, "please sit with me. We need to talk about what happened at the gala." Marisol's hands stilled in the soapy water. She dried them slowly on her apron, each movement careful and deliberate, as if buying time. When she finally sat across from Vivian at the kitchen island, her eyes stayed fixed on her folded hands. "I should have told you before," Marisol began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Mr. Whitaker, about Nico." "Take your time," Vivian said, pushing a fresh cup of coffee toward her housekeeper. "I'm listening." Marisol wrapped her fingers around the warm mug but didn't drink. "It was 5 years ago. I was new to the city, working 2 jobs. Mr. Whitaker came often to the restaurant where I served breakfast." Her voice strengthened as she continued. "He was kind at first, charming, left big tips. Asked about my dreams." Vivian nodded, keeping her face neutral despite the familiar pattern emerging. "When I told him I was pregnant, he promised to help. Said he'd make sure Nico had everything he needed." Marisol's fingers tightened around the mug. "Then he disappeared, changed his phone number. His assistant said he'd left the country on business." Did he know about Nico after he was born? I sent pictures through his office. Letters. I never asked for money, Ms. Hart. Marisol looked up finally, her eyes fierce with dignity. I just wanted Nico to know his father. To have a name, a history. Every child deserves that much. Vivian reached across the counter and covered Marisol's hand with her own. You're right, they do. I'm sorry about the gala, Marisol said. I didn't know Nico would. He's just so honest, you know. Sees Mr. Whitaker on TV and says what's in his heart. Children have a way of speaking truth we adults try to hide, Vivian said. She squared her shoulders, decision made. I want you to take paid leave, starting today. I'm calling my personal attorney. She'll represent you if Graham tries anything. Ms. Hart, I can't accept. You can, and you will. This isn't charity, Marisol. It's justice. Vivian's tone was firm but kind. You and Nico deserve protection while this plays out, and you'll keep your job here as long as you want it. Tears spilled down Marisol's cheeks. Why are you helping us? Because it's right. And because. Vivian smiled softly. I've learned recently what it means to shelter someone else from the storm. Later that afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Commons main room. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor beside Nico, carefully folding a sheet of paper into sharp creases. The secret, Caleb explained, is getting both sides exactly even. Like this. He demonstrated the fold, watching Nico's small hands copy his movements. Maya sat nearby at one of the old tables, pretending to do homework while secretly recording the lesson on her phone. She caught her father's patient smile, the way he adjusted Nico's fingers without taking over. Now the wings, Caleb continued. See how they angle up? That's what gives it lift. Nico's tongue poked out in concentration as he matched the folds. Like real planes? Just like real planes. My dad taught me this when I was about your age. Caleb helped Nico make the final crease. There, ready for takeoff? Nico jumped up. Paper airplane clutched carefully in his hands. How do I make it fly? Aim for that window, Caleb pointed. Hold it steady, then give it a gentle push. Remember what I said about lift? Needs a little push and lots of trust. Nico recited proudly. That's right, buddy. Go ahead. Let it soar. Nico drew his arm back and launched the plane. It caught the afternoon light, sailing in a graceful arc across the room before floating gently down to land near the entrance. I did it. Nico's delighted laugh echoed off the old walls, bright and pure as sunshine. He scampered after the plane, already preparing for another flight. Vivian stood in the doorway unnoticed, watching the scene unfold. She'd come to drop off some paperwork, but found herself rooted in place by the tableau before her. Caleb showed infinite patience as Nico's next few flights went astray, offering encouragement and small adjustments. Maya abandoned any pretense of studying, now openly filming as her father taught the little boy the fine art of paper aviation. Something squeezed in Vivian's chest as she observed them. This makeshift family in the warm afternoon light. Caleb's gentle strength. Maya's protective affection for Nico. The boy's uninhibited joy filling every corner of the old building. She thought of her own childhood, private schools and piano lessons, nannies instead of parents, achievement valued over connection. All the money in the world, but never this. Never the simple magic of folded paper and shared laughter. Nico made another successful flight, this one sailing right past Vivian's shoulder. He stopped short when he saw her, suddenly shy. Don't let me interrupt, she said quickly. That was an excellent launch. Mr. Caleb taught me about lift, Nico announced, retrieving his plane. Want to see? I'd love to. She watched as Nico demonstrated his new skill, his small face serious with concentration. Caleb caught her eye across the room and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that never failed to make her heart skip. This, she realized, was what she'd been missing all along. Not just love, but family. connection. The messy, beautiful reality of lives intertwined. Maya sidled up beside her, phone still recording. "Dad's good with kids," she said casually. "Always has been." "Yes," Vivian agreed softly, watching as Caleb showed Nico how to adjust his plane's wings for better flight. "Yes, he is." The city council chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Every wooden bench was packed, with people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Veterans in their service caps sat shoulder to shoulder with church ladies in their Sunday best. Maya perched near the front, phone ready to record. Vivian Hart stood at the podium, her usual corporate polish replaced by something more genuine, a simple blue dress, minimal jewelry. She gripped the edges of the wooden stand, taking a deep breath before speaking into the microphone. "Members of the council, I come before you today not as CEO of the Hart Foundation, but as someone who has learned what true community means." Her voice carried clear and strong through the chamber. "I was wrong about the Magnolia Commons Veterans Center." "We were all wrong." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several council members leaned forward in their seats. "The proposal before you suggests demolishing the commons to build a modern wellness complex. On paper, it looks progressive. New jobs, increased tax revenue, improved property values." Vivian paused, meeting the eyes of each council member. "But what we failed to consider was the irreplaceable value of what already exists there." She gestured to the veterans filling the benches. "These men and women found healing within those walls. They rebuilt their lives there. They continue to serve their community there. You cannot put a price tag on that kind of sanctuary." Walt "Pop" Delaney raised his cane in silent support, tears glinting in his eyes. Other veterans nodded solemnly. "I am officially withdrawing the Hart Foundation's demolition proposal," Vivian continued. "Instead, I am pledging my personal resources to preserve and enhance the commons through an adaptive reuse plan, one that will honor its legacy while securing its future." The chamber erupted in surprised applause. Maya's phone captured the moment Vivian stepped back, shoulders straight despite the weight of defying her own board. Caleb Brooks approached the podium next, still in his work clothes, grease stains visible on his rolled sleeves. He cleared his throat, unfolding a worn piece of paper. "I had a speech prepared," he began, then tucked the paper back in his pocket. "But I'm just going to speak from my heart, if that's all right." He looked out at the familiar faces. Veterans who'd served alongside him, neighbors who brought casseroles when his wife passed, children he'd watched grow up. The Commons isn't just a building. It's where I learned to live again after losing my wife. It's where my daughter Maya found her second family. It's where soldiers become civilians, strangers become brothers, and broken spirits find healing. His voice grew stronger, filling the chamber. "We talk about progress, about moving forward, but sometimes the most progressive thing we can do is preserve what matters. The Commons taught me that brotherhood doesn't end when the uniform comes off. That memory isn't just about the past, it's about who we choose to be today." Maya wiped tears from her cheeks, her phone trembling slightly as she filmed. "So I'm asking you, not just as a veteran, but as a father, a neighbor, a citizen of this city, save this place. Let us keep sheltering each other. Let us keep remembering together." The chamber exploded with cheers and applause. Veterans stood, saluting. Church ladies waved their handkerchiefs. Even some council members dabbed at their eyes. The vote was unanimous. The Commons would stand. Later that evening, as the sun set over Savannah's oak-lined streets, Caleb and Vivian sat together on the Commons' wide front porch. The old swing creaked gently as they rocked, neither speaking for a long moment. "Thank you," Caleb finally said, his voice soft in the gathering dusk, "for standing up to your board, for believing in this place." Vivian turned to face him, her eyes bright in the fading light. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to truly serve something bigger than myself." The swing creaked again as they drew closer. Caleb's hand found hers, rough fingers intertwining with smooth ones. The air felt charged with possibility. "Vivian," he whispered. "May I?" She answered by closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, like the brush of butterfly wings. When they parted, both were smiling, shy but certain. The next morning, Maya stood before St. Phoebe's congregation, her white choir robe catching the light streaming through stained glass windows. The piano's opening notes filled the sanctuary as she lifted her voice. "Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home?" The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Caleb's phone screen as he stared at the image spreading like wildfire across social media. His stomach churned. The photo showed him years younger at a veterans' protest against predatory housing developers. But the caption twisted everything: Heart Foundation's new boyfriend. Radical activist with history of violence. In the original context, Caleb had been protecting an elderly veteran from being shoved by private security. Now, cropped and filtered to look more menacing, the image painted him as an aggressor. His dark skin and military build were being weaponized against him, turned into something threatening. Comments flooded in beneath each share. "Can't trust these people. Always knew that center was trouble. Gold digger, playing the long game." Maya sat beside him at their kitchen table, her own phone buzzing with notifications. "Dad, people from school are sharing it. They're saying awful things." Caleb placed his hand over hers. "Baby girl, remember what your mama used to say? Truth stands when lies fall." But his voice wavered. He'd spent decades building trust in this community, repairing cars, mentoring youth, serving others. Now Graham Whitaker's media machine was dismantling his reputation with surgical precision. At the Hart Foundation's glass-walled headquarters, Vivian faced down her board of directors. The conference room crackled with tension as enlarged prints of the viral photo covered the polished table. "This association is damaging our brand," Gerald Matthews, the marketing director, declared. "We're already dealing with the Whitaker paternity scandal. We can't afford another PR crisis." "The photo is deliberately misleading," Vivian countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Brooks was protecting a fellow veteran from abuse. We have the full footage." "The public isn't interested in context," Barbara Chen from Legal interjected. "They see what they want to see. And right now, they're seeing our chairwoman romantically involved with someone who appears violent and unstable." "Appears to whom?" Vivian's tone sharpened. "I noticed none of you mentioned his decades of community service, his successful business, his exemplary military record." "Vivian," Gerald leaned forward, his expensive suit crinkling. "You need to distance yourself from this situation. It's bad optics." "Bad optics?" She stood, planting both hands on the table. "Is that what we call racial bias now? Coded language to make prejudice sound professional?" The board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. "I will not distance myself from a good man being slandered," Vivian continued. "In fact, I'm calling a press conference to set the record straight." "We strongly advise against that," Barbara warned. "Noted." And ignored. Vivian gathered her papers. "This foundation was built to help people, not crush them under the weight of public opinion. If we can't stand for truth, what are we even doing here?" She strode out, heels clicking against marble floors, leaving behind a stunned silence. Back at his garage, Caleb tried to lose himself in work. The familiar rhythm of tools against metal usually brought peace, but today each clang felt hollow. His phone kept buzzing with messages from concerned friends and suspicious strangers alike. Walt Pop Delaney hobbled in around noon, leaning heavily on his cane. "Brought you lunch, son. Figure you might not feel like going out today." Caleb wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Thanks, Pop. You didn't have to." "Course I did." Walt settled onto a work stool. "Seen the nonsense they're spreading about you. Bunch of cowards, attacking a man's character from behind keyboards." "Maya's taking it hard," Caleb admitted. Principal called. "Some kids are giving her trouble." That girl's stronger than steel, just like her daddy. Walt unwrapped 2 sandwiches. Remember when they tried smearing Dr. King? Called him every name in the book. But truth outlasted the lies. They ate in comfortable silence until Walt spoke again. Ms. Hart called the Veterans Association. Wanted to make sure we knew the real story. That's a good woman, Caleb. Too good to get dragged down with me. Caleb sighed. Her board's probably having fits. Let 'em fit. Sometimes standing tall means standing alone for a while. Walt gathered his cane. But you're not alone, son. We've got your back. After Walt left, Caleb tried focusing on a transmission repair, but his thoughts kept drifting. He'd faced racism before, subtle looks, random police stops, doors that somehow closed before he reached them. But this coordinated attack felt different, more personal. The afternoon sun was setting when he finally closed up shop. As he walked around to the back lot, his steps faltered. Fresh red spray paint screamed across his garage wall, "Traitor!" The letters dripped like blood in the fading light. Caleb stood there, tool belt heavy on his hips, decades of dignity weighing on his shoulders. With mechanical movements, he retrieved a bucket and brush from the supply closet. The water was cold as he began scrubbing, each stroke methodical and silent. Paint ran pink down the concrete, staining his work boots. He kept scrubbing, even as darkness fell and his arms ached, even as tears mixed with sweat on his face. He scrubbed until his hands were raw, until the wall was clean, until all that remained was the ghost of hatred that no amount of soap could wash away. The legal notice arrived on crisp paper, hand-delivered to Marisol's tiny apartment door. Her hands trembled as she read. Graham Whitaker was suing her for defamation, demanding $5 million in damages for malicious lies that had irreparably harmed his reputation. Vivian found Marisol crying in the townhouse kitchen, crumpled papers scattered across the counter. "He's trying to destroy me," Marisol whispered, wiping her eyes with her apron. "How can I fight someone with so much money?" "You're not fighting alone," Vivian said firmly. She pulled out her phone and dialed her attorney. "James, I need you to handle a countersuit and schedule DNA testing immediately." Across town at St. Phoebe's Baptist Church, Pastor Ruth Ellis stirred a pot of soup in the community kitchen while counseling Marisol. Steam rose between them like prayers. "The truth is like a seed," Pastor Ruth said, adding a pinch of herbs. "You can bury it deep, pile dirt on top, but it won't stay hidden. Given time, it grows right up through concrete." Marisol gripped her mug of tea. "But what about Nico? He's just a little boy." "The reporters, the lawyers, it's too much." "Children are stronger than we think," Pastor Ruth replied, "especially when they're surrounded by love." She gestured toward the window, where Nico was playing basketball with some older kids from the youth group. His laughter carried through the glass. Meanwhile, in Caleb's garage, Maya watched her father kneel beside their old station wagon, demonstrating proper tire-changing technique. "See how the lug wrench fits?" he explained, positioning her hands. "You want to loosen them in a star pattern, never straight around." Maya nodded, her braids falling forward as she leaned in to study his movements. "Is this because of what happened to the garage?" Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "Life's going to throw flat tires at you, baby girl, real ones and metaphorical ones. I want you to know how to handle both kinds. Like how you're handling the people who vandalized the shop? Exactly." He helped her position the jack. "We don't let hate stop us. We just keep doing what's right, keep helping others, keep moving forward." Maya tightened the lug nuts with determination. "Like Mom would have done." "Just like your mama." Caleb smiled, though his eyes glistened. "She'd be so proud of you." At the Hart Foundation headquarters, Vivian sat with her legal team reviewing Graham's lawsuit. The conference room windows reflected the setting sun, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. "He's trying to bankrupt her into silence," James Thompson, her lead counsel, explained. "Classic intimidation tactic. But we've got him cornered with the DNA testing order." "He'll try to delay," Vivian mused, scanning the documents. Already is. His lawyers are claiming scheduling conflicts, requesting continuances, but the judge isn't having it. Test results should be back within 2 weeks. Vivian nodded, remembering Marisol's tears. Make sure she has round-the-clock security. Graham's desperate and desperate men do desperate things. Back at St. Phoebe's, Pastor Ruth led an evening prayer circle. Marisol sat between 2 elderly deaconesses who held her hands as they prayed. Lord, Pastor Ruth's voice filled the small chapel, we ask for patience as we wait for truth to bloom. Give us strength to stand firm when the winds of fear blow hard. The group murmured Amen as candlelight flickered across their faces. After the prayers, Pastor Ruth walked Marisol to her car. Remember, dear one, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for every woman who's been told to keep quiet, every child who deserves to know their story. Marisol hugged her tight. Thank you for not letting me feel alone. As night fell, Caleb locked up his vandalized garage, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The spray paint was gone, but the memory of those hateful letters remained, like a shadow on his heart. He drove home slowly, mind churning with worries about Maya, about the Commons, about Vivian facing her board's disapproval. The weight of it all pressed down like humid Georgia air before a storm. But something strange happened while Caleb slept. Around midnight, trucks began arriving quietly at his garage. Veterans, young and old, black and white, some walking straight, others leaning on canes, emerged from the vehicles carrying tools and supplies. Walt Pop Delaney supervised from his wheelchair as younger vets replaced damaged siding and repainted walls. 2 retired carpenters rebuilt the vandalized workbench. A former Navy Seabee installed a new security system. They worked through the night, moving with the precision of a well-trained unit. Some wives and daughters brought coffee and sandwiches. Maya's choir friends came to help clean up debris, singing softly as they worked. When dawn broke, Caleb's garage looked better than new. Fresh paint gleamed in the morning light, new fixtures sparkled. The security cameras were discreetly placed but thorough in their coverage, and taped to the front door was a simple note, written in Walt's shaky handwriting, "We've got you, brother." The morning sun hadn't yet burned through Savannah's signature fog when Caleb approached the Commons. His footsteps echoed off the empty sidewalk, keys jingling in his hand. The old building's brick facade glowed orange in the early light, its windows still dark and peaceful. Then he saw it. The bright orange notice was impossible to miss, nailed directly into the century-old wood of the front door. Caleb's hands trembled as he pulled the paper free, the nail leaving an angry hole in the door's surface. Notice of demolition. It screamed in bold letters. By order of the City Planning Commission. Caleb's eyes skimmed the document, catching phrases that hit like physical blows, immediate effect. 72-hour vacancy requirement, failure to comply, will result in. His phone buzzed. Walt's name flashed on the screen. You seeing this, son? Walt's voice was tight with anger. They posted these all down the block, even on St. Phoebe's bulletin board. I'm looking at ours right now, Pop. Caleb pressed his palm against the door's warm wood, as if he could protect it through touch alone. How'd they push this through so fast? Graham's got friends in high places. Deputy Commissioner Thomas owes him from way back. Inside the Commons, Caleb flicked on the lights. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating decades of memories. Veterans' photos on the walls, Maya's robotics trophies, the old piano where the choir practiced. All of it scheduled for the wrecking ball. His phone buzzed again. Vivian, Caleb, I'm in an emergency board meeting, she said, her voice strained. I'm fighting this, but Graham's gathered support. They're saying the permits are ironclad. Can't you stop it? It's your foundation. The board. She paused, and he could hear raised voices in the background. They're voting to suspend me as chair. Graham's convinced them I'm compromised by our relationship. The words hung heavy between them. Caleb thought of Maya, of how quickly their quiet life had turned into newspaper headlines and legal battles. "I have to go," Vivian said. "They're calling the vote. I'll call you as soon as—" The line went dead. Throughout the day, the Commons filled with angry, worried voices. Pastor Ruth organized an emergency meeting. Maya and her friends posted updates online. Veterans made calls to every official they knew. But as evening approached, the reality became clear. The demolition order would stand. Graham's influence ran too deep, moved too fast. Rain began to fall as Caleb waited on Vivian's townhouse steps. She'd texted that the board had suspended her, that Graham was now interim chair. When she emerged from her car, her usual elegant composure was cracked. Her eyes were red. "We'll fight this," she said, hurrying toward him through the drizzle. "I've called in every favor, hired the best lawyers. Stop." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "We need to talk." They stood beneath her porch light, rain tapping softly around them. Vivian reached for his hand, but he kept his arms at his sides. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. "Caleb, please. Maya's college applications go out soon. She's got a real shot at MIT with her robotics work. But who's going to look at her fairly if her daddy's all over the news fighting billionaires? If they're calling him a troublemaker? We can protect her." "I have resources. That's exactly what I'm talking about." Caleb's voice cracked. "Everything shouldn't have to depend on someone with money stepping in to save us. That's not the lesson I want my daughter learning." Vivian stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "What we have is real. You know that." "What we have is beautiful," Caleb agreed. "But sometimes beautiful things cost too much." "Don't do this." Vivian's whisper was almost lost in the growing rain. "Please." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. Memorized the way her hair curled in the humidity, the precise shade of brown in her eyes, the strength in her bearing even now. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his umbrella, the same battered one from the day they'd met. "Thank you," he said softly, "for showing me what it feels like to fall in love again, for reminding me my heart still works." "Caleb," he pressed the umbrella into her hands, "keep it. Something to remember me by." Then he stepped off her porch into the rain. The drops fell harder now, soaking through his jacket, plastering his shirt to his skin. Behind him, he heard Vivian call his name once more, her voice breaking. He didn't turn around. The rain grew heavier as he walked, but Caleb didn't seek shelter. Let the storm soak him. Let it wash away these past weeks of dreams and possibilities. Let it clean him down to what mattered most, being Maya's father, protecting their community, staying true to who he was. Water streamed down his face as he disappeared into the dark savannah night, leaving Vivian alone on her porch with nothing but an old umbrella and the sound of rain. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Caleb made his way through Live Oak Cemetery. He knew this path by heart. 15 rows back, 3 stones from the magnolia tree, Sarah Brooks's headstone stood waiting, polished granite catching the early light. Caleb sank to his knees on the damp earth, not caring about his work clothes. His calloused fingers traced the engraved letters of his wife's name. "Morning, baby," he whispered. "I could really use your wisdom right about now." The cemetery stretched quiet around him, Spanish moss swaying gently in the breeze. A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, its red feathers bright against the gray morning. "Maya's doing good," he continued, his voice rough. "You'd be so proud of her. That robotics competition's coming up next month. She's got a real shot at first place." He paused, collecting his thoughts. The morning air felt heavy with unsaid words. "I met someone," he finally admitted. "Her name's Vivian. She's different from anyone I've known. Reminds me a little of you, that same quiet strength. But now everything's falling apart, and I don't know if I did right by walking away." Tears pricked at his eyes, but he blinked them back. "I keep thinking about what you always said, about how doing the right thing isn't always doing the easy thing." "But Sarah, honey, I don't know what the right thing is anymore." The cardinal chirped once, then took flight. Caleb watched it disappear into the morning haze. "I miss you," he whispered, "every single day." Across town, Vivian Hart paced the polished floors of her historic townhouse. Her footsteps echoed off high ceilings and pristine walls. Everything was perfectly arranged, immaculately clean, and completely lifeless. She paused at the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. Caleb's umbrella stood in the corner where she'd left it, its worn fabric a stark contrast to her elegant decor. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier. She'd never noticed before how the rooms seemed to stretch endlessly, one into another, all of them vacant despite their careful furnishings. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the foundation's PR team about damage control. Another carefully crafted statement about reviewing community input while the bulldozers waited in the wings. Vivian's hands shook as she switched off the phone. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the steady tick of an antique clock. She moved to her study, where financial reports and architectural plans lay spread across her desk. The Commons demolition schedule stared up at her, marked in efficient red ink. Next to it sat a photo from the Veterans' Dinner, Caleb laughing with Walt, Maya demonstrating her robot, elderly vets sharing stories over coffee. Something cracked in her chest. She grabbed her rain jacket and headed for the door, not bothering with an umbrella. She needed to walk, to think, to breathe. The streets of Savannah blurred past as she walked without direction. Her designer shoes splashed through puddles, but she barely noticed. Her feet carried her through familiar neighborhoods until, without conscious decision, she found herself standing before St. Phoebe's Baptist Church. The old brick building rose solid and steady against the gray sky. Vivian sank down on the wide steps, not caring about the dampness seeping into her clothes. She buried her face in her hands. "Lord," she whispered, the word feeling strange on her tongue after so many years. "I don't know what to do." "Most honest prayer I've heard in a while," came a familiar voice. Vivian looked up to find Pastor Ruth Ellis standing there, a knowing look in her wise eyes. The older woman settled herself on the step beside Vivian, arranging her skirts with unhurried grace. "Been expecting you," Pastor Ruth said simply. "You have?" "Mm-hmm. When folks reach the end of themselves, they tend to find their way here." Vivian wiped at her eyes, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "I've made such a mess of everything." "Have you now?" Pastor Ruth's voice held no judgment, only gentle inquiry. "Or have you just been trying to keep everyone happy instead of doing what's right? I don't know what's right anymore." "Yes, you do." Pastor Ruth's words were firm but kind. "You've known since that first day you saw the Commons, saw what it really means to people. You've known every time you watched Caleb with those veterans, every time Maya showed you her projects, every time Marisol looked at you with hope in her eyes." Vivian stared out at the rain-slick street. "The board won't listen. Graham has too much influence." "Stop hiding behind boards and influence." Pastor Ruth's voice took on steel. "You're Vivian Hart. You built an empire from nothing. You've got more power than you're willing to use because you're scared of standing alone." "I am alone," Vivian whispered, "only because you're choosing to be." Pastor Ruth stood, straightening her dress. "Stop hiding. Tell the truth in the light." She headed up the church steps, pausing at the door. "There's coffee in the fellowship hall if you want it. And child? The Lord's been waiting a long time for that prayer you just prayed. Might want to finish it." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Vivian alone with the sound of falling rain. She tilted her face up to the dark sky, feeling drops mix with the tears on her cheeks. "All right, Lord," she whispered. "Help me." The morning sky hung heavy over St. Phoebe's Baptist Church. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching up like metal flowers. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, microphones ready, as rain misted down in a fine curtain. Pastor Ruth stood at the top of the church steps, her calm presence a stark contrast to the media frenzy below. Maya Brooks sat on a wooden folding chair near the door, fingers twisting nervously in her lap, Walt "Pop" Delaney stood at attention beside her, his weathered face set with quiet dignity. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The crowd stirred as Vivian Hart stepped out, wearing a simple gray dress without jewelry. For the first time in public memory, she carried no umbrella. She climbed the steps slowly, letting the rain soak into her carefully styled hair. Whispers rippled through the assembled press corps. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the unusual sight of the normally polished billionaire standing unprotected in the weather. Vivian reached the microphone that had been set up beneath the church's overhang. She stepped away from its shelter, choosing instead to stand exposed to the elements. Water trickled down her face as she gripped the podium. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I've called this press conference to tell the truth. Not a sanitized version, not a press release drafted by lawyers, but the simple truth that I've been afraid to speak." She took a deep breath. The Hart Foundation's plan to demolish Magnolia Commons Veterans Center was built on lies. Our board, under Graham Whitaker's direction, manipulated data to label a thriving community hub as urban blight. We used coded language about neighborhood improvement to mask what was really an attempt to profit from others' displacement. Gasps rose from the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. I knew it was wrong from the moment I truly saw what the Commons meant to this community, but I tried to work within the system, to make small changes while protecting the Foundation's image. That was cowardice on my part. Rain dripped from her chin as she continued. Today I'm announcing that I am pledging my personal fortune, separate from Foundation assets, to establish a community land trust. This trust will preserve not just the Commons, but other vulnerable properties throughout Savannah. The community will control this land, not developers or distant boards. A murmur went through the crowd. Vivian gripped the podium tighter. I'm also releasing to the Justice Department a complete record of internal emails and documents showing how certain board members manipulated property assessments and influenced city part officials. I expect to face consequences for my part in this. I welcome them. Movement at the back of the crowd drew attention. Caleb Brooks emerged from his old truck, still in his work clothes. He walked through the press gathering, his presence commanding respect despite his simple attire. Vivian's voice caught slightly as she saw him. He climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, until he stood beside her in the rain. "I'd like to say something," he said quietly into the microphone. Cameras swung toward him. Caleb squared his shoulders, the same way he had before countless military briefings. "My name is Caleb Brooks. I fix engines for a living. I'm a single father. And I've been afraid." He paused, rainwater running down his face. "Afraid of losing the Commons. Afraid of what speaking up might cost my daughter. Afraid of loving someone whose world seemed so different from mine." Maya wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her father. "But the Commons isn't just a building," Caleb continued. "It's where we remember who we are. It's where veterans find brotherhood again, where kids like my Maya learn they can be engineers and artists, where an old soldier taught me how to fold a flag with honor after my wife died." His voice grew stronger. "Some things are worth more than fear. Some things are worth standing in the rain for." Applause broke out from the church steps, spreading through the crowd. Pastor Ruth's rich voice called out, "Amen." Vivian reached for Caleb's hand, gripping it tightly. They stood together as the cameras flashed, rain falling steadily around them. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. A young lawyer in a rain-spattered suit pushed through the crowd, waving a manila envelope. "Ms. Hart," he called out. "The DNA results just came in." The press corps surged forward. Graham Whitaker emerged from his Mercedes, his usual smooth confidence cracking as he saw the envelope. The lawyer handed the results to Vivian, who opened them with steady hands. She read quickly, then passed them to Marisol, who stood protected under Walt's huge black umbrella. Marisol's voice carried clearly across the hushed crowd. 99.99% probability of paternity. Graham's face went ashen. He spun on his heel and strode toward his car as reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Whitaker, will you acknowledge your son? Did you try to hide this with the Commons demolition? Were foundation funds used for the cover-up?" But Graham was already sliding into his Mercedes, tires squealing as he pulled away from the curb. The press pack gave chase, cameras bouncing as they ran. Through it all, Caleb and Vivian remained on the steps, hands clasped, letting the rain fall where it would. The emergency city council chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls. Veterans in their service caps sat shoulder to shoulder with church ladies in their Sunday best. Maya perched on the edge of her chair between Caleb and Pastor Ruth, clutching a folder of petition signatures. Council President Thompson called the room to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "We're here to reconsider the demolition permits for 412 East Liberty Street, known as Magnolia Commons Veterans Center." Vivian Hart rose from her seat in the front row, crisp in a Navy suit. "Madam Secretary, I'd like to enter new evidence into the record." She approached with a thick stack of documents, property assessments, environmental impact studies, and community testimonials. The council members passed the papers among themselves, murmuring as they read. Thompson cleared his throat. "Given this new information and the recent revelations about certain parties involved in the original permit process, I move we vote to rescind." The motion passed unanimously. Maya squeezed her father's hand as Thompson continued, "Furthermore, I move to designate Magnolia Commons as a historic landmark, in recognition of its vital role serving veterans since 1946. Another unanimous vote. The room erupted in cheers. Walt "Pop" Delaney dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. Vivian stood again. "If I may, I have one more announcement." She unrolled a property map on the council table. "The Hart Trust has purchased the vacant lot adjacent to the Commons. We're dedicating it for expansion, including the Maya Brooks Technology Lab and the Marisol, Nico Family Resource Center." Maya's mouth fell open. Marisol, sitting nearby with Nico, covered her face as tears spilled down her cheeks. The celebration spilled out onto the sidewalk. Someone started singing Amazing Grace, and others joined in. Caleb found himself swept into hugs and handshakes from every direction. By early afternoon, the Commons was alive with activity. Pickup trucks filled the parking lot, loaded with lumber and tools. Veterans in work clothes climbed ladders while church ladies set up folding tables groaning with food. Walt supervised from his lawn chair, calling out instructions, "Mind those shingles. Son, overlap them proper, or she'll leak like a sieve." Vivian had changed into jeans and work boots, her hair tied back with a bandana. She worked alongside everyone else, passing up boards and fetching water for the crew. When she caught Caleb watching her, she gave him a questioning look. He crossed the yard to where she stood. The sounds of hammering and friendly chatter filled the air around them. "I was wrong," he said simply, "to walk away. To think I had to choose between loving you and protecting what matters." Vivian's eyes softened. "I understand why you did. Sometimes protecting what we love means taking a step back. But sometimes," she gestured at the busy scene around them, "sometimes it means building something bigger than ourselves." "Together?" Caleb asked quietly. "Together," she agreed, reaching for his hand. A whoop went up from the roof crew. They'd finished the final section. Maya's voice rang out from the church steps. "Hey, everybody, come look." The workers climbed down, gathering in the yard. The choir members from St. Phoebe's lined up on either side of the steps, still in their work clothes but standing tall. Maya nodded to them, and they began to sing, "Amazing Grace." How sweet the sound. As the music swelled, 2 deacons unfurled a wide banner between the columns. Bold letters proclaimed, "Under one umbrella." The crowd broke into applause. Caleb wrapped his arm around Vivian's shoulders as they gazed up at the banner, at the fresh roof, at the community that had come together to raise them both. Walt called from his chair, Well, don't just stand there gawking. There's gumbo getting cold and a dance floor waiting. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Someone turned on a portable radio, and the sounds of soul music mixed with the hymn's final notes. Children darted between the adults' legs, playing tag. Nico proudly showed off his paper airplane to anyone who would watch it soar. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the scene, over the saved and strengthened commons, over the people who had fought for it, over Caleb and Vivian standing together at last. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Pastor Ruth's parlor, where Vivian sat before an antique mirror. Maya stood behind her, carefully pinning small white flowers into Vivian's silver hair. "These were my mom's," Maya said softly, touching one of the delicate blooms. "Dad kept them pressed in her Bible. When I told him I wanted you to wear them today, She paused, blinking back tears. "He hugged me for a long time." Vivian reached up and squeezed Maya's hand. "Sweetheart, are you sure? They're so precious to you both." "That's exactly why," Maya replied, securing another flower. "Mom would have wanted them to be part of today. She always said love grows when you share it." In the study down the hall, Walt Pop Delaney knelt before Caleb's chair, methodically polishing the veteran's dress shoes. His weathered hands moved in steady circles, bringing the leather to a mirror shine. "My daddy taught me this," Walt said, not looking up from his work. "Said a man's shoes tell his whole story. These here?" He tapped the well-worn sole. "These are working man's shoes, honest shoes. But today," he gave them a final buff. "Today they're dancing shoes." Caleb laughed softly. "I haven't danced since Sarah passed." "Well then," Walt replied, standing with a grunt, "it's about time you remembered how." The church porch had been transformed. White ribbons fluttered from the railings, and mason jars filled with wildflowers lined the steps. Simple wooden chairs faced the entrance, where an arch of magnolia branches framed the doorway. Veterans in their dress uniforms began arriving early, gathering in small groups to share stories and jokes. Church ladies bustled about with last-minute touches, straightening tablecloths, arranging plates of cookies, and fussing over the punch bowl. Marisol arrived with Nico, who proudly carried a small pillow with 2 golden rings. She had sewn him a new bow tie for the occasion, and he kept reaching up to adjust it, trying to look grown-up. Pastor Ruth moved through the crowd in her robes, greeting everyone with warm hugs. She paused to straighten the quilt draped over the porch swing, the one the community had stitched with veterans' names during their fight to save the commons. The choir gathered near the steps, warming up their voices softly. They wore their regular Sunday clothes rather than robes, making the ceremony feel more like family than performance. When Caleb emerged from the church study, a reverent hush fell over the gathering. He stood tall in his pressed army dress blues, ribbons gleaming on his chest. Walt gave him a sharp salute, which Caleb returned with dignity. Maya appeared at the door next, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a small bouquet of daisies. She took her place beside the choir, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. The piano inside the church began to play, not the traditional wedding march, but a gentle gospel tune. The congregation rose, turning toward the church door. Vivian appeared in the doorway, radiant in a knee-length cream-colored dress. The small white flowers in her silver hair caught the sunlight like stars. She carried no bouquet. Instead, she held a familiar black umbrella, now decorated with white ribbons. Pastor Ruth's voice carried across the porch, "Dearly beloved, we gather today under God's open sky to celebrate not just love, but shelter. We come together to witness how 2 souls, guided by providence and an unexpected summer storm, chose to share their umbrella." She smiled at the couple before her. Caleb and Vivian remind us that it's never too late for new beginnings, that sometimes the greatest acts of faith are the simplest, offering shelter, extending trust, opening our hearts to possibility. Maya stepped forward from the choir, her voice clear and strong, as she began to sing, "His eye is on the sparrow." Tears shone in her eyes, but her smile was radiant as she watched her father take Vivian's hands in his. The couple exchanged simple vows, their words carrying across the hushed porch. They spoke of trust and second chances, of building bridges and sharing strength. When Nico brought forward the rings, he executed a perfect little bow that made everyone smile. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Ruth proclaimed, "and with the blessing of this beloved community, I now pronounce you husband and wife." As Caleb and Vivian shared their first kiss as a married couple, the choir burst into joyful song. Every veteran present stood at attention, offering a crisp salute to honor their brother's happiness. The reception spilled from the church porch into the Commons courtyard, where tables groaned under platters of fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet potato pie. Children darted between clusters of chatting adults, their laughter mixing with the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Marisol stood near the punch bowl, watching Nico play tag with Maya and some other kids. Her hands fidgeted with her apron strings. Even at a wedding, she couldn't quite shake her habit of trying to keep busy, to be useful. "Marisol?" Vivian's voice was gentle. She stood in her wedding dress, holding a manila envelope. "Could you join me for a moment?" They moved to a quiet corner of the courtyard, where an old oak tree provided shade from the afternoon sun. Vivian's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. "I want you to have this," she said, pulling out a document with an official seal. "It's the deed to the little yellow house on Maple Street, the one with the garden you admired last month." Marisol stared at the paper, uncomprehending. "I don't understand." "It's yours," Vivian said simply, "free and clear. Every family deserves a home of their own." Marisol's hands flew to her mouth as the reality sank in. But I can't possibly." "You can, and you will," Vivian insisted softly. "You and Nico deserve roots, stability, a place where you can plant flowers and paint the walls any color you like." "Nico," Marisol called out, her voice breaking. "Ven aquí, mi amor." The boy ran over, cheeks flushed from playing. When Marisol told him they would have their own house, his eyes grew wide. He threw himself into his mother's arms as she wept, her tears falling onto his dark curls. "Can I have my own room?" he asked, looking up at her with shining eyes. "Sí, mi vida," Marisol whispered. "Your very own room." Across the courtyard, Graham Whitaker stood apart from the celebration, his usual polish somewhat dimmed. He watched Marisol and Nico's embrace, something like regret crossing his face. Pastor Ruth approached him, her expression stern but not unkind. "The ethics board called this morning," he said without preamble. "They're expanding their investigation beyond Nico. They're looking into all the development deals from the past decade." Pastor Ruth nodded. "And what will you do?" Graham straightened his tie, a nervous gesture. "I'm liquidating my real estate holdings, setting up a scholarship fund for veterans' children. It won't fix everything, but—" he glanced at Nico again. "It's a start. Repentance isn't just about money, Graham," Pastor Ruth said quietly. "I know." He pulled out his checkbook and began writing. "But it's where I know how to begin." The afternoon mellowed into evening. Fairy lights twinkled in the oak trees as the crowd thinned. Some veterans stayed behind to clean up, waving away Vivian's protests that they should leave it for tomorrow. "Ma'am," one gruff old Marine told her, "we take care of our own. You're family now." Walt supervised the cleanup with military precision, directing volunteers like a general organizing troops. Maya helped pack leftover food into containers, making sure every elderly guest had something to take home. The children's energy seemed endless. They had discovered an old jump rope and were taking turns skipping, their rhymes floating through the twilight air. Down in the valley where the green grass grows, there sat Vivian, sweet as a rose. Caleb and Vivian settled onto the Commons porch swing, their shoulders touching. His dress blues were slightly rumpled now, and she'd kicked off her shoes, but they looked utterly content. Their joined hands rested between them as they watched the children play. A breeze stirred the magnolia branches. carrying the sweet scent of summer jasmine. The swing creaked gently as they rocked, a peaceful counterpoint to the happy shrieks of the children playing below. Nico was attempting to teach some of the other kids a clapping game he'd learned from his mother. His voice rang out clear and confident, so different from the shy whisper that had started all this months ago in a glittering ballroom. Maya joined the children's circle, her formal dress forgotten as she clapped and sang along. She caught her father's eye and waved, her smile bright in the gathering dusk. The porch swing continued its gentle motion as evening settled over the commons. Caleb and Vivian sat in comfortable silence, their fingers intertwined, watching the children play in the last light of their wedding day. The autumn rain fell softly on the newly renovated Magnolia Commons, gentle drops catching the morning light. The old brick building wore its updates proudly. Fresh paint, repaired windows, and a new sign that made Maya blush every time she saw it. Maya Brooks Technology Lab. Inside, the halls hummed with activity. Veterans gathered for their morning coffee in the common room, while young people tapped away at computers in the tech lab. The space felt alive, a perfect blend of old and new, history and hope. Caleb stood in the doorway of the Marisol, Nico Family Resource Room, watching a young mother get help filling out job applications while her children played with educational toys in the corner. The sight warmed his heart. This was exactly what they'd fought for, not just preservation, but growth that served the community. "Ready for lunch?" Vivian's voice came from behind him. She'd been in her small office, the one she insisted on keeping here instead of at the Foundation's glass tower downtown. She preferred working among the people she served. "Just waiting on Maya and Nico," Caleb replied, turning to smile at his wife. Even after these months of marriage, seeing her still made his heart skip a beat. She wore simple clothes now, slacks and a sweater, having long since abandoned the need for power suits at the Commons. Maya emerged from the tech lab, where she'd been teaching a coding class to veterans' kids. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Mr. Johnson's grandson just built his first website," she announced proudly. "He's only 10. Nico burst out of the children's reading corner, clutching a book about space exploration. At 9 years old, he'd already declared his intention to become an astronaut. "Can I bring this to lunch?" he asked, looking hopefully at Maya, who had become something of a big sister to him. "Of course, buddy," she answered, ruffling his hair. "Maybe we can talk about the Mars rovers while we eat." Near the entrance, a wooden rack stood filled with umbrellas of various colors and sizes. A hand-painted sign hung above them. "Take one when you need shelter. Bring it back when you can." The idea had started small, just a few umbrellas for veterans caught in the rain. Now it had become a symbol of the common spirit, sharing what you have, helping where you can. Walt Pop Delaney sat in his usual chair near the umbrella rack, unofficially monitoring their comings and goings. "Looks like you'll need one," he called out, nodding toward the windows where rain still fell. "Just brought in a fresh batch yesterday." Vivian reached for a large blue umbrella, but Caleb beat her to it. "Allow me," he said with a wink, making her laugh. It was their private joke now, remembering that first rainy encounter that had changed everything. They gathered under the covered entrance while Caleb opened the umbrella. Maya pulled up the hood of her sweatshirt, but Nico darted out to feel the rain on his face before scampering back under cover. "Ready?" Caleb asked, holding the umbrella wide enough for all of them. They stepped out together, huddled close under the blue canopy. The rain pattered softly above them as they made their way down the sidewalk. Through the drizzle, they could see the Commons' new community garden, where vegetables grew in neat rows, tended by veterans and neighborhood children alike. "Remember when this was all just a dream?" Maya mused, looking back at the building. "When we thought we might lose it?" "Hard to believe it was only last summer," Caleb agreed, his free arm around his daughter's shoulders. Nico skipped alongside them, occasionally stopping to splash in puddles despite Vivian's gentle reminders about keeping his shoes dry. His joy was infectious, making them all smile. They passed the spot where Caleb and Vivian had first met. That corner on Broughton Street where a random act of kindness had sparked something extraordinary. Vivian squeezed Caleb's hand, and he knew she was thinking of it too. The rain picked up slightly, drumming a steady rhythm on their shelter. Other pedestrians hurried past, some ducking into shops, others protected by their own umbrellas, several of which Caleb recognized from the Commons rack. "Look!" Nico pointed excitedly. "That lady has one of our umbrellas." Sure enough, an elderly woman across the street carried a familiar red umbrella with the Commons logo. She waved when she saw them looking, and they all waved back. "The Umbrella Brigade," Maya laughed. "That's what Pastor Ruth calls it." They paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A young veteran with a prosthetic leg approached, and without hesitation, Caleb shifted the umbrella to make room for one more. The man smiled gratefully, joining their little group until they reached the next corner. This was what the Commons had become, not just a building, but a movement. A reminder that everyone deserves shelter, that community isn't just about sharing space, but sharing life. The rain softened to a misty drizzle as they neared the cafe where they planned to have lunch. Vivian touched Caleb's arm, making him pause. "You know," she said softly, looking up at the umbrella above them, "I thought I was giving shelter that night in the rain, but truth is you gave it to me." Caleb smiled, tightening his grip on her hand as they walked into the future. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.